All right, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you watching at home, welcome to the Education Programs and Services Committee. I am Mike Elliott, your host and chair. I am joined by fellow board members Emily McCormick, J.P. Prego, Dana Hipser, and our ex officio, Melanie Cunningham. How you doing? Also, we've got Dr. Farina in the house, our assistant superintendent, our director of special education, Carol Giblin, supervisor of special education, Amy Coyle, and we have got curriculum supervisor, Sarah Rothrow, and director of technology, James Raw. No Kim Bass tonight. Oh, there you are. Look, somehow I guess how did I do that?
I'm not even going to camouflage.
Seriously. All right, so welcome Kim Bass. How are you? Good to see you. All right, so the first part of our agenda tonight is the approval of the March 16th Education Program Services minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion?
Do I have a second? Do I have any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, which is why I assume the esteemed Dr. Carpenter is with us tonight, Targeted Support and Improvement Plan Update.
I'll take it from here.
Yay.
Rock
All
and roll.
right. So first, let me talk about some of the things we are going to discuss today. And through some of the communication, and we originally had a TSI overview. And I'm going to back up and share that because there are some new to the dialogue. But there are other things that we do want to talk about at the end of the meeting related to curriculum, as well as a Tier 2 notification that we received. And you'll see why this does dovetail with our TSI designation. Some of those concerns overlap. And then we'll turn it over to Kim for the really fun stuff, which is the curriculum work. Yay, Kim. So we were notified that, and this is the review, that the high school was identified following the data analysis for TSI, which is the lowest level of targeted intervention offered by PDE. And so it's from a one-time snapshot, and then they ask you sort of as an at-risk category to start doing some work. And so we talked about that. If there is a consistent pattern of growth, then you move up the tiers of support and intervention offered by the state.
So just to be clear, so when you say lowest, it's not the bottom, it's the start
It's
of
the least,
tier.
correct. So this is a snapshot, and what is the important nuance is this is done annually. And so the interesting part is we weren't notified till March, and it was for the previous year. We should have typically gotten that information, sometime in the early fall.
Like September would be nice.
Yeah, and so that creates a little oddity in the planning process in and of itself. But just to keep in mind, this plan, if it had unfolded normally, we would have gotten that information and we would have been expected to implement it this school year. So now our plan is due in September for the data that should have affected this past school year, but we still have to do it. So that
It's from the 21-22 year.
Correct.
Right,
Correct.
and then, okay.
So we're working, in the rearview mirror,
And we
essentially.
could
However,
technically be out of it
we could.
with this year's data.
Yes.
When they look at our this year's data, we may not be designated as TSI. However, we still need to implement the plan. So what was the reason for that targeted improvement? It is a combination of several things, 3 in fact. It's our 4- and 5-year cohort graduation that we collect. It's combined growth in ELA and math of special education students and combined achievement. And so Dr. Carpenter is here tonight to talk to us about some of that data through the Future Ready Index. So here is why we were designated. They establish cut scores and criteria annually, and then they measure your data against it annually. So it's not consistent, but this is the reason. Our combined math and ELA was 24.32. So that is below 36. which is the cut score. Our growth, we certainly did not meet growth because we're in the negative. We actually lost traction in the area of growth for that population. So for our special ed students in the 2021 school year, it's hard to even say now. And then the expected grad rate was 74.27. We were just shy of that at 74.04.
So that's
We-
like one kid?
Yeah.
Okay, just check.
So that's the data set that was really how we ended up in our situation. So that kicks us into what is called targeted school improvement. And so it is the idea that we need to actually look at the whole school. And so it's a very specific process that the state rolls out for school improvement. It's through their PDE portal. They tailor it, they ask us specific questions that we need to answer. And so our intention is to walk you through that initial, I'm going to call them tabs, because that's the way it'll make sense, and then talk about how we will continue to communicate all of the data. So it's a huge data set. We've had internal meetings on how to even process that data in a meaningful way to engage classroom teachers, department heads, and our administrators at large. Because I need to say this, and I'll say it as many times as I can. While TSI designation is for the high school, the academics began far before. And so we understand that this is not just a point-in-time correction. This is a long-term effort to help everything that precedes the high school. And so we do need to meaningfully engage our administrators and classroom teachers K through 8. And so we're thinking about how to methodically do that so they understand that by the time kids get to the high school, they may be deficit so many skills that it really becomes a struggle, particularly around programming for students with disabilities.
So they don't do that same for K through 8? They don't do, PDE doesn't do the same testing for it?
So they do.
Okay.
It's just, the further you go in school, the skills become more complex and the gap grows like this. And with students with disabilities, we have to ask lots of questions around, how we might support them. But certainly the plan that we're going to walk you through today is around the high school. But just know that in the background, we're talking about whole district efforts. And we have been working on some of those. So,
Well, doesn't that kind of tie into a lot of things that we've been talking about, either in this committee or through the last number of years on the board? I mean, we've been talking about curriculum and trying to make changes to that. How does this, and maybe you'll touch on this later, but how does this shine a lens on the processes that we've put in place to make improvements?
this is how did we not tie the bow? Is the question that there is so much foundational work that has been done, but
Right.
the laces aren't tying up, right?
Okay.
So we're not seeing necessarily the benefit from MTSS, PBIS. So we have to ask ourselves questions about how did that happen? And really the needs assessment process is tailored to do that. And so really it has us take a really diverse look at the data that's collected for students, both prescribed in a standardized fashion, the things we think about are like Keystones and PSSAs, but then our local assessments. What do our midterm and finals look like? What are unit assessments? I mean, there's a huge curriculum lens. We've leaned in so much into standardized, standards-based assessment. Where is the traction? Where did we lose some of that traction? But this also opens us up to all kinds of data sets, discipline, attendance, what are our ADMs or, what's happening with kids. So from the mental and behavioral health arena, it asks us to look at all of that, goals and objectives and monitoring, are kids really growing in the areas that they're deficit in? So,
And you can break that down in a way to look student per student to look for deficiencies, right?
correct. So we will be tasked in not this particular tab, because what we'll talk, or what Rob will talk about today is big picture. You know, how did everyone perform and how did our special ed population perform? But we will have to dig in to those varied tabs. There's equity tabs, there's related academic tabs, and then there's academic tabs that are the huge lift in terms of data analysis.
No, this isn't great news, and we know that. We are feeling pretty good about the processes that we have in place. We knew some of these areas were problems for us, so it's a good opportunity to have to go through the process. I will say, one of the reasons that we have better traction sometimes K-5 is because of the personnel that we have there. And so we're moving coaches into the middle school. We started that this year. We're trying to get somebody there next year to kind of help run that MTSS model. This is what MTSS is for. This is what it does. It supports every student. It looks very different at the secondary level, and that's by necessity. So we're working to improve those processes even before this happened. So though it's not great, we're really happy that we have processes in place already to begin to address a lot of the issues.
And I would just add to Kim, before we ever got this unfortunate notification, before that, but even more intensely in the fall, and Rob can address that as well, especially at our middle school and our high school, we were really zooming in on our special ed population, intervention students are getting, what's the frequency, what's the progress, and really matching goals to the progress. Are we making progress? Is each student doing that? And then what's the intervention we're providing to really look at every student and then break it down that way as well. So that had started pretty intensely in the fall.
Well, we've been talking about that for a while.
Yeah.
Cool.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So before we dive too deep into this, you know, this whole evaluation, the PD evaluation, it's not new, right? It's been around.
Well,
We took, because of COVID, they took a year off of reporting anything. They took a year off from testing, therefore they took a year off from reporting.
Right.
And in 2020, they didn't count the PSSAs the way that they did because COVID had hit in March. So we're coming back from a couple of years of not having reporting. And so this is the first year they're applying the TSI, ATSI, and CSI.
So that
sounds
rolled
like
out with
programs.
us.
Yeah.
So
But
that,
are these things that we could have been tracking and trending?
Oh, we have
before
been.
see
Oh, we
that
have
it's
Yeah,
coming or
yeah.
not?
And we have been. I mean, we didn't know what the targets would be necessarily for a TSI, and neither did PDE, which is why it took them 9 months to let the schools know where they fell. So they identified the lowest performing tier, which was CSI, and that was based on the data. So they had to look at the data, find that lowest performing, and then do the calculations from there. So not knowing exactly what the cutoffs would be, we knew the areas where we had some work to do, but we didn't know exactly what the cutoffs would be and what that would mean for us in terms of being identified.
And when we go through this, we'll see, but
Yep.
I'm just
They're
kind of
good
curious
questions,
if
yeah.
if we saw a downward trend in these specific.
Mm.
You're going to see that.
you're going to see that.
Okay.
Yeah, and the one other factor that you'll see in our next programs and services meeting is feedback from actual classroom teachers. Because it is a factor. You know, what is their perception of this and instruction and processes and procedures? And is there a misalignment with what, you know, best practices and some of the things that we've asked for, which, you know, we laid the foundation in order to collect some of that information, like when we talk about Lincoln benchmarks and we talk about map testing and we talk about, you know, creating standards aligned assessments that are put in a portal so we can monitor that they're standards aligned. You know, do people understand that those were recommendations tailored to continuously monitor students' acquisition of the standards? And it'll be interesting because the next data set that we talk about is teacher perception of being in TSI and why that might be, which is a very different lens than just the facts, right? Just what we see in the data.
Sure.
So
Interesting.
Yep.
all right, so I'm going to turn it over to Rob, who's going to talk about section 1.
Section 1, is, like Andrea said, is a look at big picture strengths and needs as a school, and then strengths and needs when we pull out and look at our special ed achievement. So, are you familiar with the Future Ready Index? Okay, so the Future Ready Index gives us it was implemented a few years ago, our building score. And incidentally, our building score was 80.4 when that came out in the fall, between the fall and the winter. And I was happy with that score. We all were happy with that score. When we look at our league and also the surrounding school districts, Southern Lehigh, Quakertown, Sourton, there's only two high schools that had a better score than us, Sourton and Springford. So we were pretty happy with that.
No, that's awesome. How long have they been doing the Future Ready PA?
So I presented it, so it was after I got
It
there.
was,
so
I think, 2017. Yeah.
Yeah, it
It used
took
to be
over-
school performance
yeah.
profile, which was a report card, which nobody liked because it felt very punitive and it really only looked at PSSA and Keystone. So they moved from SPP to Future Ready, where they're looking at not only academic performance, they're looking at attendance, they're looking at performance in 3rd and 7th grade, ELA and math, respectively. They're looking at college and career readiness, attendance, graduation rate, advanced classes. So they put more factors in and called it Future Ready. So it's a more comprehensive look rather than just the SPP, which was a score based on basically growth and achievement on PSSAs.
So the next slide is a screenshot of the first page of the Future Ready Index. And as you can see, it's broken up into 3 areas: state assessment measures, that's on your left, on-track measures. We don't have, that top one is English ELL, our ELL folks, and we don't have a significant number at the high school, so it doesn't count for us.
You need 20, just for
Attendance.
content, you need 20 Ls in any given building to get enough data to
We
saturate
don't have a
it.
lot.
We have 20,
Yeah.
In the district, right? So, yeah.
well, it's grown, it's grown,
Yeah.
but not in one building.
So the on-track measures really for us is our attendance. And then, like Kim said, the college and career measures. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So like Andrea said, we had to look at our big picture, excuse me, as a school and then special ed. So the first thing we'll talk about.
Can I just the colors and arrows give you exactly what you should get,
Right.
which is blue is,
Blue's good.
green is, you
Okay.
sort of have stayed the course, red is
not
never.
good.
And then the arrow is how you did according to last year's data. So you're up from last year, you're down from last year. If it's just a circle, you either stayed the same or.
So is it
So
really
they
last
they
year?
don't want to go with green, yellow, and red?
Yeah, no, but I thought,
Blue is-
if anybody had questions about the colors, they really did try
Blue's
to.
really good. Blue's really good, green's good. red, obviously.
So what year,
This is
Is-
21-22 that
Yeah.
you're looking at right now.
thank you for
You're welcome.
understanding my consent question.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through some strengths. We identified some strengths. So we put together a high school steering committee. Carol, Andrea, Sarah, Amy, Kim are part of that. And our building administrators and teachers, especially teachers in the Keystone areas and special ed. So we met, we dived into Future Ready Index. We had meetings individually as a building team and then collectively here with our group. And we kind of went through this Future Ready Index, and we identified the first strength we'll point out here is that we are growing, this is whole school, we are growing our students in English, math, and science. And the blue is really good. So we're exceeding the growth target for all 3 of those Keystone subject areas, based upon their projections coming to us out of middle school.
So Mike, it's excellent. That's a very good thing to know. What I will say is sometimes people get very confused by that and they're like, but we're growing, and they want to just stop there. The rate of growth needed for students to catch up at grade level is often so steep that even though we're showing growth, the amount of growth is not necessarily enough to get them to proficiency, certainly not to get them to advanced. So we're happy when we see growth. We always celebrate growth, but the rate of growth needed for a lot of our students is so steep that it's just not enough. So when you look at achievement, you're going, I'm scratching my head, I'm not understanding this. You could have students who are growing in below basic, right, to just further in below basic or up to basic. or somewhere within the basic realm. So just to put that in context, it is good news. I'm not downplaying that, but when I look at that, I always wonder more.
They're not hitting proficient.
Right, and as a principal, one of the conversations I used to have is they're benefiting from your instructions. That instruction is not tailored to what is expected at that level or in that content. And so there's a disparity. So they're growing, you're teaching them and they're learning. So you're doing some good things, right? And we want kids to learn and grow. It's just not at the level or where it needs to be for that content area.
How have the growth numbers been over the past number of years?
Good.
Historically, they've been good.
And I think that that's such a great reason to celebrate, but I think sometimes we stop there and we say, oh, I'm so glad my students grew. I'm so glad they grew. They're growing, and that's good. But it's that level of achievement. We really want to kick things up a notch and try to look forward to that.
And it also leads us to the inquiry about where did they leave before? You know what I mean? What did that look like? So we have to start going backwards to ask those types of questions.
I mean, you'll hear some of our elementary specialists say they come in at such a steep curve, right? They come in already so far behind. So I just was writing all day the pre-K counts grant, so I'm so excited that we might get that. That's one step in the right direction, putting additional measures in to make sure we understand what the deficiencies are earlier on. I'm super encouraged to see our data from this year. There's been a good deal of work in root cause analysis and then applying specific strategies to meet those needs. K to 5 really strong, moving in the right direction, 6 through 12.
Sorry.
Becomes a little bit more difficult. We know how kids learn to read. That's a very clear process. We know where to go back if they're having trouble with sounds or letters or sentences. When you get to the high school, it generally lives in comprehension, and it's hard to do a root cause analysis. Maybe they just don't care. Is one of those things where they're just not interested in this particular reading. So I don't want to diminish that at all. It's excellent.
And a lot of times this is, you ask about what have we been doing. MTSS is the process with which we monitor growth and achievement, and we ask teachers to use all of these assessments that have been implemented. I mean, particularly since I got here, and the district has moved in a wonderful direction in that. But now it's valuing that data in instruction around achievement.
To your point, I mean, you and I have been here about the same amount of time. So I want you to have success because then, from a personal perspective, I feel good about what we've done.
Yeah.
So, no, I definitely want to see stuff like that. And I know, I always felt like when I got here, when my kids started going to school, like we had a lot of catching up to do. Like we had kind of like coasted for a while. And it feels like over the last number of years, we put a lot of, focus on this. And obviously we have more work to do, but, so, anyway.
So another strength we identified is the career standards benchmark. So you've heard of chapter 339, college and career readiness artifacts. So 97.5% of our kids are meeting, they're getting the artifacts that they need to get. Now, I think that can be better. The state performance standard is 98. We need to be this. We're close, but that's why we're not blue, we're green here. Because we're still below that standard, that's the performance standard that is established by the state. The average across the state, you see, is 88. So we're well above that, but we should be a little higher than 97.5. So, and here, this is our, I don't know what grade is. That's the 5-year cohort. So here's another strength. And I sat in front of you, I think in the fall, and talked to you about this and said how proud I was, and I still am, proud of the 92.9 graduation rate. And then we get the TSI designation, and it was a shot to the gut, to be honest with you. So I'm still proud of that 92.9 because we went up. We went up a little over 1% during our COVID time. And we're already above the state goal for 2030. And we're well above, I shouldn't say well above, but we're above the state average.
So we're on ATSI though because of the special
Correct.
education number within that number.
Yeah.
I can see your faces going, well, then
Yeah.
why are we, it's
This is the
because.
I didn't get there yet.
I know, I'm sorry.
This is
I
whole
could just see Mike's
This
face.
is whole school,
Yeah.
right?
This is
Hold on,
whole
we got a next
school.
slide.
And then there's also a 5-year cohort.
Oops, sorry.
So they combine the 4 and the 5 for the special ed graduation. So the next slide, thank you, Andrea, is our whole school challenges. And you saw on the Future Ready Index, so here are our challenges. This is whole school, this is achievement, this is performance on the Keystone exams, not the growth. This is hitting that proficient number that we need to hit. And you can see where we are, and not good. 21-22 school year.
But at least we're still better than the statewide average.
In math, but not
But yeah,
in bio, which, you know, we need to look into more of that. And that, obviously, this process is going to allow us to dig deeper in that. And you'll see that there is a trend that we're going down in these two areas, which is something that is obviously a concern that we have to address.
And just for context sake, the statewide goal for 2030 is, you know, it's set. And so the expectation is you look at where you are in the year you're sitting in, and then how much growth is required to get over the years left to get to that goal. So,
that kind of stinks because that still leaves 5 years behind or 20,
so,
30,
I
7
mean,
years behind.
and the amount, the percentage of growth increases because, you know, this started,
So,
I mean, we originally had 13 years to hit the 2030 goal. So now we get closer and closer, so, you know,
Yeah. And
Becomes more
nobody's going to try to make an excuse, but we are coming out of COVID, and that's a factor.
so is this what you were talking about, Kim, when we exceeded the growth in math and
Yeah.
science,
And we're like,
however,
ooh, yeah.
we're still kind of in the basement?
Well, so every student, so I can see, we can see PBOS projections for every kid coming into the high school. I can also look at the 10th graders, but if you look at the 9th graders, they're going to be projected there's a group of 70% or higher that's projected to be proficient. Then they give a range of 40 to 70% or projected, have a 40 to 70% chance to be proficient, and then less than 40. So they'll identify and name all those kids, you know. So like Kim was saying, so those kids that have less than 40% chance to be proficient, chances are we're growing those kids. And we are, but we're just not getting them to the proficient level,
Right.
you know? So that, I think if I can say this, I think that's what, and I'm not trying to speak for Andrew, but what she was saying is it's not just a high school thing, even though the buck stops with us, it's a K to 12 thing. And that's a prime example of that.
It gets handed to you and the results are shown for the high school, but
Right.
it starts way before
Right.
that.
I mean, there are learning opportunities here, and the bottom line is, and you'll hear me say this, like, we have to jump in sooner, and it's not a special ed thing, it's not a regular thing, it's a Upper Park High School thing, that we have to work with all of our students and intervene sooner for kids.
Can you go back a second? Oh, wait, is it next year? What's the next slide?
So the next thing we're gonna do is go into the strengths of the special ed group. So now we're
Okay,
gonna
well, wait,
dig into special ed, when you're finished asking your question.
thank you. Okay, so what does the data look like over the last couple of years for the science biology thing? Have we seen that proficient, and I know that COVID happened and.
Truthfully, we usually do well on bio. I was very surprised by this. I was very surprised. Bio is one of our higher performing over the years, Mike. Math is not. Algebra 1 is traditionally not great at the high school.
So I can give that to you here. So I'm in the Future Ready Index, and you can see this graph. You can see
Wow.
that's statewide average, all student groups. So here, I'll say it out loud.
It's okay.
So over the last 3 years, we were at 68.1% proficient, whole school. Then 2021, we went up a little bit to 71.6, and then 21-22 dropped to 26.3.
That was
So,
yours.
And Kim's right, historically, bio has been pretty good.
Yeah.
Not as great for us as English, but compared to the state, we were great
I'm
with
not
our numbers.
understanding this. This has me very, very puzzled. It was grossly different than any other year. And
Well, I don't remember seeing anything like this and going, whoa.
John,
You know, but this is
Well,
like a-
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
algebra
not
has
afraid
been
to say
a
it.
challenge.
I'm not-
Algebra has
Yeah.
been a challenge.
And our ELA numbers are up, so ELA is trending
Yeah.
up, which is good. Bio had been really good. This is a puzzler for me. And then math is just kind of always, yeah.
This could end up being an outlier though, possibly.
Well,
So, yeah.
you may see
Well,
some
you don't
other
know.
things that were cause for inquiry. When we
Yeah.
get into our subgroup data too, there were some anomalies that we all went,
And I will say, I don't know if this is related or not, I just know because I'm also in the midst of it right now, there were a lot of opt-outs this year. There were a lot of students who had not been in school full-time, who had not wanted to, and families exercised their right for a religious opt-out, and we had a lot of kids not test this year. I don't know how that factors in, but I just wanted to say it because it
feels
was a
like it
large
should.
number. So I was just thinking about that as we're looking
We
at
made
this.
a curricular move, if you remember, to move life science to 8th grade in
Yeah.
middle school. And after the first year we did that, our teachers, our bio teachers said that was a great thing.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit. And then kids got a couple of years or a year and a half or whatever it was of virtual instruction. And I don't think that helped.
and we'll talk, I mean, Kim mentioned the opt-out. That will be particularly important to note when we talk about our tier 2 notification related to special ed students.
Do you have, are you good?
I'm good for right now.
All right. So the next slide we're going to, now we're looking at strengths and needs of our students with disabilities. So again, this is from the Future Ready Index. These are screenshots. So again, with growth, it's a strength. Even though we dipped from 2021 school year to 21-22 school year, but you can see the last couple of years of our growth on the left is algebra for our students with disabilities, and on the right is bio. Now that's,
We were surprised at the 100%.
Yeah.
I mean,
Again, it's another one of those.
we don't always see 100% in a lot of, yeah,
Yeah.
so.
and the first COVID, the last quarter of the year, 1920, you can see that the scores are the same. That's because we didn't test, and that's what Kim referenced earlier, that we didn't test, but the state gave us the same scores.
So they counted.
So that's why they're the same now.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Another one is the, now, this is not growth, this is scoring proficient, so this is slightly different. In English, we had a slight uptick, but we thought that was still a strength, that we improved with our students with disabilities. We went from 29% proficient to 31, almost 32%. That's not growth. That's the proficiency.
Yeah.
And then, for our challenges or areas of need, these are the 3 areas that we're, on target for, on state correction, TSI for. So the combined math and ELA achievement, which is the Keystone proficiency, and, we're below the 36.23. And then for the same, students with disabilities in math and ELA, we didn't grow. They didn't grow. That, if you remember, that was a -1. And then the last one is the 4- and 5-year cohort graduation rate for students with disabilities.
So that first bullet there, that's the combined proficiency. So we just saw the ELA proficiency, which was 27,
31.
31, so we're only 5% in math. Is that what that means?
Well,
I think you were thinking of whole group. I think you're thinking of the whole group.
Well, no, if Andrew, you can go back.
So that
Yeah,
one.
right
Oh, here,
there.
I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah.
So the
that's
math is a little higher.
31.7. Well, no, it says combined though.
Oh, this,
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
31.7,
So math killed us.
so math is only
Do you
five.
have
That's
this
what
picture for math?
Yeah, that's,
That's growth.
That's whole school, though, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So students, the strengths for students with disabilities, growth in 2 areas, achievement in the 1 area, which is ELA. And then when we look at our needs, while we're on corrective action, right there, combined math and ELA, we're not achieving. We're achieving a little better in ELA, obviously a lot better in ELA than math. But that, for some reason, why didn't they combine ELA and bio? They combined ELA and math.
what is the data, again, looking at historically, what does the data look like over the last, 5 years or so?
In achievement,
Yeah, for the combined math and ELA achievement
Oh.
benchmark.
They don't usually combine them,
Combine
Mike.
them.
That's what's unusual
Yeah.
about this, is this, and that's the other reason we wouldn't have known if we were gonna fall in any of these categories, because they don't combine math and ELA as a rule for anything. I don't know
So-
why they do.
I
And
think
typically,
it-
when we do our school improvement efforts, we take them in isolation. We look
Yeah.
at,
It
we
makes
look
sense
at
to do
achievement
that.
and growth for each of those content areas. And I don't exactly know the process with which they combine them, what that psychometric
So I can give
calculation
you
is.
math.
Nor did they share it with us in the trainings that we've had to go to.
So it's not like we could have known that, it's like we got it and found out. Is that what I'm hearing? About the combo thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
we don't look at it in a combined manner.
So
And
it's
I don't
not like
think
they're
we knew
like,
they
hey,
were
by the
doing
way,
that. Right,
we're doing this now. We didn't know that until we got the,
agreed, yeah.
do we, just because you guys probably know other folks, have any other districts been
We're in
like?
good company.
Yes.
Okay.
With lots of
Yeah.
people
Lots of our
near
local
us.
friends.
Okay.
And
And-
we
and
all-
Everybody loves company.
and historically,
Right,
Very
historically,
wealthy
high-performing districts
So-
are joined.
here's math proficiency number, the last 3 years. Now, remember, this goes the year before the initial shutdown. 74.7, 64.4, and then 21, 22, 48.4. That's whole school math achievement.
You don't have the breakout of it.
I
I have
do.
special ed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have special ed, so during that same time period, 27.5, 17.2, 15.2. So you see the trend in whole school and then also with special ed.
Does it tell you the number of the sample size?
Mhm.
You said you had a lot of opt-outs.
Yeah, you
That's
can export
statistically,
that,
that's
it
a
would tell
huge
you.
variable,
Correct.
when you use your sample size.
You can get that on the Future Ready, how many kids took it?
Not in this spot,
Right.
but I think I can. Don't hold me to it. Look while you.
I mean-
I'm also here staring.
I'm usually not here. so
I don't-
never-
No pressure. So while Kim searches for that,
I will, while Kim searches for that, I
But we
will
did-
give you ELA proficiency overall, 76.4. And then 2021, for some reason, it's insufficient samples. So I remember we talked about
We
that.
did, it has
Yeah.
to do with when they're banked. They're banked for their junior year, and there weren't any banked from the year before.
Oh, probably,
Remember
yeah,
that? Because we
makes
didn't have
sense.
anybody testing that year.
So 76.4 and then 21, 22, 78.7. Now here's special ed. Well, I
Yep,
showed
we
you,
saw that,
I
yeah.
showed you special ed, 29.4 and then 31.7.
So it was math.
But to go back to the one math, the math had drop.
Math, I mean, when you combine, ELA is pretty good, it's decent, and then you throw in math, which isn't, and that's what tanked us.
Tank the whole thing.
So the math scores aren't necessarily surprising.
They're not surprising. And that's not that we're taking it lightly. It's just, we know it's trending in that direction. I'm not surprised by that. I was flabbergasted by bio. And pleasantly surprised with lit because they went up a pretty good amount.
Yeah, it's frustrating to look at these last 3 whole school math scores.
so in this tab, it really is just very big picture. We you know, these are just, and we're tasked to pick 3, you know, 3 whole school, 3 in the platform, and then for the subgroup, do the same. And then what comes next, and what we'll talk about, is the conditions for leadership, teaching, and learning. It's a self-assessment. The results we're administering it through Qualtrics. It's ready to go. Rob wanted to make sure he had the opportunity to meet with his team, all of his departments, to go through this designation prior to launching that survey, because it would seem really out of the blue.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the second part of this that we'll talk about on May 18th. The June 15th board presentation is the one that's the real in-depth one. That's where we're tasked. Yeah, I mean, there are much more components and features. We actually, as a team, have to decide what data to also include. And so we map that out internally. We still have to have some additional conversations, but you know, as it relates to our students with disabilities, what other factors should we be looking at outside of just standardized testing, which is very limiting in terms of their actual success.
Is there a way, or, and obviously there's so much data, but is there a way, I guess you're trying to figure this out, is, like, how does it go through the year too? Maybe like track as the year progresses, like where are we, September, or October,
Yep.
November, December?
So part of the school improvement process at this level is that it has to be board approved, and we have to share. So what we'll push out of the whole system are goals that the board approves, that are monitored by the team and Rob's team, and that we regularly report out on.
But we also track individual student data
All
all
the
the
time.
time. So we
Yeah.
have, you know, our benchmarks are beginning, middle, end of year. Curriculum-based assessments we're monitoring in between. Once we have those benchmarks, we try to do some diagnostics to figure out what's wrong, and we're following up. So yes, we're following up with individual students all year long as a part of our normal practice. I didn't know if you were referring to that or this.
Oh, sorry.
Maya.
Actually, I mean, I know that we do
Okay,
that
okay.
per student, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and maybe you'll answer, or maybe the answer's along the way or whatever, but, so, you know, we figure out the plan, we implement said plan, how do we track how well the plan is doing through the year?
So that'll be part of our plan. So we,
Okay.
in addition to the action steps, we have to have observable measures that we can report out on. So we haven't talked about that, because as we unpack the data that will be presented in June, it's going to flesh out a needs assessment, and what we present at EPS in August is, here are our action steps, here's the data we will collect and report out on regularly.
Okay, I mean, I know that it's really, but just,
Yeah.
ask the
And
question.
there's, you know, it depends on what our highest priority needs are to move the needle, you know, because it may be that, you know, some of this is they're not even in school to learn. You know, they're absent 90 days a year. You know, it doesn't really matter what we do if they miss 90 days of Algebra 1. So, you know, I think that's something our team has to tackle, because attendance of this particular population can be
Yeah,
very
you
difficult.
could look at our attendance on Future Ready Index too.
So, but then at EPS in August, we'd like to present the whole plan. And then, you know, at the workshop, request approval. It has to be done and approved and submitted back through the portal by September 1st.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
I think we asked those.
And I will say, student attendance for special education, I just pulled it up on Future Ready. I'm going to take you through from 2018, 2019. It was 81.7% to 78.4% to 75.5%. So in that specific subgroup, we are trending downward in attendance.
So is that something we're gonna try to jump on too?
Yeah.
Because I don't
Every
want
part of
to
it. Yeah,
go through this
yeah,
whole
yeah.
exercise and then say, well,
100%.
we didn't solve
So,
the attendance, so our numbers aren't gonna come up, and we're still gonna be in it, like, that's
And,
not
you know,
something I wanna hear an
And I don't
excuse
think we
for,
want
but
to
make sure
dive
we
into
dive
that
into
right
it.
now, because we could dive very deeply into just that piece right there with this subgroup. But if you, as Andrea was mentioning, and if you look at some of our programming and some of our students and their disabilities, and our kids basically overall that have the highest level of need. And if they're struggling, whether it's mental health, whether it's behavioral, whether it's academic, that could obviously increase not coming to school, giving up, a number of things. And what are we required to do? We implement, we follow the state law and everything we're expected to do with attendance. Unfortunately or fortunately, we talk about it almost every month when we're at the high school and the other buildings as well, if attendance is the issue. And it is for a number of our kids that we have difficulties with. And yes, are they taking the data? Are they sending the required letters? Are they submitting to go before the judge? Yes. Again, maybe unfortunately, but I'll say in general, post-pandemic, you could be waiting 6 to 8 to 9 months to be seen in front of a judge for, because we need help, right? We all need to work as a unit, and so that's just one little piece. And then we go to the county.
Well,
So,
and the question
yeah.
then, that we'll tackle in that particular tab is, there are very prescribed, attendance protocols that we follow. But is, going to the judge and all that, what other ways do we get kids engaged to be in school? And there's a whole host of, we're doing all the compliance part of that, but is that really good?
But it still doesn't
Well,
overcome.
think about the
It's not-
PACE data that
it's
Andrea
so
shares every year. Think about that
Every-
PACE data that you share every year. It really is about how do we create a culture where kids want to come to school, where they feel as though they can learn, where they feel safe. So that PACE and the PA climate survey really gives us some other telling information about all those pieces, JP. So as we put it together, we really want to make sure we're not leaving any of those things out.
And some of
Engaging
that
families
is,
as well.
Yeah.
and
You
some
know,
of that
with
is
the
in
support
that
of
time.
school.
Sorry. So,
So just out of curiosity, if someone knows off the top of their head, I see percentages, but how many kids are we talking about out of 3,200?
Rob will
couldn't
tell you
find
how
it,
many
yeah.
in the graduation cohort made a difference. It was 8 students, right?
Yeah, so when we're talking special ed, yeah, roughly 9, if we lose 9 special ed students, we're at 75%.
And there's a close connection between the dropout rate and the graduation rate. And if you recall from the last compliance monitoring, we were on the improvement plan, and we actually continued with it in that area. And it's literally, as he's saying, 9. Well, I will tell you, the last data point we had prior to what we'll get this year, we had 8 students at the high school who dropped out. So if you drop out, you don't graduate. And that's 8 students. Now, we could already, and I think we shared in a prior meeting, a snapshot of the next one coming. There's no concerns there. I believe we have 2 students, which clearly we have achieved, but it's, you drop out, you don't graduate. So
And they differentiate in terms of reporting. I mean,
Yeah,
it seems
different.
connected but they're 2 different calculated. I mean, it's very
Weird.
interesting. So I do want to just pivot to special ed and the tier 2 notification, just so everyone is aware, and you'll see why it's connected to
everything.
other things that we talked about previously.
So, similar to, I heard Andrea saying, getting notification and information, I believe it was early March that I think we had gotten a notification from PDE, the Bureau of Special Ed, in regards to 2 areas. We were identified a 2-prong approach looking at our kids who are taking our PASA exam or the PASA assessment, and then there's a certain expectation from the state. That has always been the case. They never expect you to have students taking PASA above 1% of your students. Now, if you think about it realistically, and we can add different points to that, we were at the 1.57% over. What I will also say to you, it is not necessarily uncommon to go over that level. And there's certain requirements. I will say there's been a number of years when I was working with the kids in PASA, we were, over that. And why? You have to look at your kids with disabilities, your kids in programming and all of those. And it also includes our kids placed in out of district that might be very, very low functioning. For example, this year, we had 6 move-in students that would be taking would take the PASA based on just their level of need.
So they offer
with an intellectual
PASA, but they don't
disability.
want you to take the PASA.
Right, so what I'll.
So here's the criteria to be eligible for
Not this, but
PASA.
that's,
And so for these, basically, every teacher needs to look at their students, they need to look at disabilities. And one of the biggest point, I will say, is an intellectual disability. We also look at the autism disability as well, but you must have an answer to that question and it must be all identical. That's your first thing, and if you come up, oh yes, they're eligible now for this, well yeah, you could say that that's correct. But now, in going through, because I'll tell you what we ended up being required to do, that's not even good enough with the state and PDE. So for example, a student with an intellectual disability, if we have all the correct answers here and we're saying they are eligible, they're gonna take the PASA, they're not gonna take the PSSA in 3rd grade, that's fine, we're actually, we followed the process, the requirements. However, what we saw in the professional development that we were required to go through because of this was, you really should ask, they may have this intellectual disability, but is there really a reason why in 3rd grade could they still not potentially try to take the PSSA? And I do think that's not a bad question, right? Maybe they should with accommodations. And then we see some of that data. That's just an example I'm throwing out there, but what I will say is, and I think this is because in the professional development as well, there was a state average. And I will say, again, I'll bring it up and I shouldn't maybe, but post-pandemic, the scores of participation rates and students qualifying, whether it's the PASA or the participation rate in any PASA keystones or the PSSA, there's an expectation of 95%. And Kim already talked about it because of whole district, but again, we look at the subgroup, and I think the numbers have really increased. Maybe it's post that, and parents really in this district looking intently at, opting out. And so they're the 2 things that we looked at, the 95% for taking any assessment. And I will tell you at the high school, I think when we look at the subgroup there, I think it's an average of opt-outs for the participation between the different assessments was about 85–86% did take it, and the expectation is 95%. And so, go ahead. You wanna
So
add
I would just say, this is another one of those very unique catch-22s. So they make the PASA eligible for students who satisfy that criteria that they prescribe. However, they limit it, so essentially, we've expanded our programs in the district, and we have lots of students who meet the criteria in a testing year. Unfortunately, when that happens, it kicks us over 1%. And so, the recommendation is great. Yes, why couldn't they take the PSSA in 3rd, 4th, well, they can. But if they are limited, cognitively limited, they're likely going to be below basic, and it becomes a question of what is appropriate,
Which is worse.
right? What is
Correct.
and what is appropriate for that actual child?
That's,
But that is
Like
not.
maybe the child shouldn't be taking it.
Right.
They're gonna opt out.
They're going to opt out. So you see, it becomes a very cyclic issue where I think, I've always erred on the side of giving the child an assessment that they have a possibility of performing on.
if I guess as long as you're consistent in that year over year, it would at least.
And this is not an and then you can add your point. If I can go back to years since I started here, back in 2013, maybe one of those years, we were not over the 1%. It's not necessarily an uncommon thing, and it has never been an area of concern. We could always respond to them, we can this year. Why? For those kids that did, and if we went over the 1%, we would gladly have a conversation and share the data. And that's fine, but I would say maybe 1 year over the last 10, we didn't go over. And it was always just a basic form, which it still is, you submit. But now, I think the state is seeing a number of concerns in a number of areas, and I think they're just really trying to do it. And I can share after Amy speaks what we're trying to do, because there's certain requirements that we had to do. And he's laughing because he got to participate in it. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if I could interject, because I do oversee our PASA in the school district, and, teachers will come to me and say, Amy, I'm not sure, because we do have students that kind of fall on that line because of disability category or, the variety of criteria that's up there. So it's a very, I don't want to say it is a difficult decision, but we do labor over it. So it's not like a willy-nilly, we're just going to qualify this student for PASA. It is a deep conversation as to whether or not it's an appropriate assessment for the child. And then the other piece that Carol had shared too, we had 6 children, move into the school district this year in the fall who came to us qualifying for PASA. So I do have to submit a survey in December indicating our numbers, disability categories. There's a number of questions where I have to defend the reason why we go over that 1%, which I shared. We had 6 students who enrolled in the school district who qualify for PASA. And we certainly review IEPs to make sure that that's a correct decision. But also when you have a student moving in November and you have to submit the survey, in December, that's not really a long enough period of time to maybe make that, assessment. So it's a very careful decision to make sure that we're doing right by the students, but also following the guidelines.
And so our requirements, when this notification lovely letter came, we needed to have a building administrator and then the special ed department. So it was Amy and myself, and we chose our high school building principal to participate with us. So we did. It was a 2-hour professional development, and then we went through. We had a lot of discussion points. I actually had a little bit of
You could have chosen any building administrator.
Well, we decided,
extra
based
time
on
with
where
them.
we are in 22, 23, and the TSI and everything, we just thought it would be most appropriate to recommend the high school principal. So he willingly and very happily did participate. It was a little bit of new learning. Like I shared that point, oh no, now it's not, if they answer, yes to all of those questions, we need to look a little deeper, a little bit further. The one thing that did come out of that as well, so after that, the 3 of us had to do a survey. It was a Q&A, and then we had to submit that to the Bureau and PD, which we did, so that is, over now. But what came out of that was when we do our group meetings monthly since then, we literally have a bullet point and we discuss, and we've shared all of this with our building special ed teachers and building administrators. We actually shared the PowerPoint as well with all building administrators so they're aware. But we really talked to them about specifically, even with the participation rate. That is not for us to discuss, to bring up, any of those things. If a parent does have a request for certain things, and Kim has shared, and she participates, I think, with most of the building principals in all these meetings to make sure they go through the process. So as much as it happens whole district, it's clearly happened in the subgroup as well with the participation rate and religious exemption, things like that.
And it becomes challenging because, they have the right to do that. However, the penalty gets kicked back to the districts.
Anytime a student doesn't participate, whether they have a medical excuse, whether they have a religious opt-out, whether it's an extended absence, and we had kids who just aren't there for the 2 weeks of testing. You get 2 weeks for Keystones. That's it. That includes the makeup window, and you get 3 for PSSA. It's 2 to test, 1 to make up. Anytime a student doesn't take the test, it counts against us. There's not a reason where the state goes, we're not going to count that one. Every single child who doesn't take it, for whatever reason, and listen, some are legit, then that counts against us. So when Andrea and I petitioned the state when we got our letter about we didn't hit 95% proficiency, we basically said you make it impossible to do that by allowing for opt-outs and counting it against us. Same with medical.
Kind of what the question was. So first of all, for this tier 2 designation, you have to meet both criteria,
Correct.
less than 95%, more than 1%.
Correct.
And Carol, you said that since you've been here, you've been right around that 1% or always above or something like that. So is this the first time you've hit less than 95%?
Well, they're 2 separate things. So the 1% is the PASA.
Right.
And so That is, as I shared generally, don't quote me, but I believe it was almost every year, or at least 8 out of the 10 perhaps, where we had to complete the form, we were over the 1% for our students identified to take the PASA. That's
Right.
one piece.
Right.
The other piece, the 95%, we have never received a notification in the last 10 years that I've been here, ever. So that's a first.
So it's possible that we might have been below that 95%, but we just never got called on it or anything like that. Do we know what that number was in the past
Do
year?
we track that
Participation.
data?
Yeah.
So participation of students with disabilities on Keystone testing methods. That's, you're asking if we track that? I mean, they monitor participation. We have never reached a level of warning. So, I mean, we
That's-
can look up participation.
Yeah.
It's not on the future, right?
No, I'm looking for the,
Yeah.
I don't remember us getting hit for.
Carol, this is.
No, I mean, as long as I've been here, we've never fallen below.
No,
I mean, we hover, but we've never had any sense.
So just incidentally, something that we talked about doing at the high school. Now we have students in Upola, and I think during that year when kids were virtual, a lot of kids didn't
Did
come
not.
in to take the
Did
Keystone.
not.
So we have a manageable number where we are going to call. Kim sent out her email, we sent out our email with our scheduled Keystone exams, and then we're gonna cold call these families, the Upola. We already have one. Sarah's gonna help monitor, student doesn't wanna come back in the building, pure issues. So we're gonna just follow up with the remainder of our Upola kids who are eligible to take Keystones. Call them and just remind them of the schedule and just say, do you have any problems getting here, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
another example, like this is K to 12, not just even at the high school. Because an example, we have a student currently, a special education student. He's not in the school. He is receiving some services for some mental health needs. And right away, the principal's contacted me, can we contact them? Because we have this period of time and the student to take, as if the student doesn't have a heck of a lot more needs to worry about. But looking again at the participation rate, we'll be following up with where the student is. Will you give the assessment? Will you not? Do we need to try and have the student come here to the district? So it's, a lot of trial and.
And I would just say, many of us who've been doing this a long time, they've sort of taken away iterations. Long ago, they had an alternate modified assessment, PSSAM. And, I think when they removed that, it created an assessment that feels very impossible for kids and their families. And so in the case of, I was a special ed teacher navigating those conversations, then a principal. And we would encourage and say, yes, you need to participate, you need to participate, you need to participate. And the notion was, why would I participate when I already know I'm not gonna, and so it's trying to encourage kids to take it. And that's what we're trying to talk to parents about too.
I'd like to ask a question, if I may. I had a couple, but I'm going to try to remember the ones that I have. So with the 95% participation requirement for students with disabilities, so you were talking about reaching out to the Upola kids, right? If you're not, but all the Upola students, but some of those Upola students, it
They're
doesn't
not-
necessarily.
Yeah, they may
help
not be
us.
in the trigger
They
class.
might not be in the trigger class.
Algebra 1, Bio, and English 10.
But they also might not have a disability, right?
Yeah, but, correct, but we still have to hit overall, so it's two things. Just like the Future Ready Index and the strengths and needs that I shared with you. Overall, we have to hit 95%.
So overall.
In special ed, we have, students with disabilities, we have to hit
So there's
95%.
two
Okay, because that says 95% participation requirement for students with
We've
disabilities.
got to do
Uh,
both.
do
We didn't
both.
meet either.
So,
Okay.
we got.
So it's 95%,
Yeah.
Of
There's
all
two
general,
students.
of all students, 95, Gen Pop, like prison, and 95% for with disabilities. And the 1% threshold then is just of all students as well, right?
No, the
Or do we think that's
1% is
that's
the
the-
specific assessment.
No, but it's
Yes,
the
of everyone.
disability, the students who are labeled with disabilities, 1% of them.
Correct.
1% of students who are in testing grades. which makes it
With the
even more,
development.
right, which, and
Better
better
taking
criteria, meet the
assets, right.
criteria to take the
So it
passes,
doesn't
so.
take-
This is not
Thank you.
PSSA, and it's not.
No, so the 1% is grades 3 through 8, it's all the testing grades.
Right.
And then grade 11, so that's not even all of the special education students in the school district. It's the kids who meet that criteria and are in testing grades. If that makes any kind of sense to you.
But it's not
It does, but it seems
PSSA.
very, yeah.
Kids who take that passive,
No, he
they're
does.
severe.
It's just.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they
But-
answer yes to all those.
Correct.
questions.
Right.
Right, yeah, well,
And
yeah.
be
you
in
would say-
testing.
They're all and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So just to be clear, Carol got a notification on the special ed one. So this is all related to special education, unrelated to ATSI. We also had a letter, if you remember, that said we were under 95% participation at our middle school and our high school. And just so you know, the middle school was under 95% in ELA, math, and science, under 95%. We had sent a letter out recently to, I worked with Alexis, we're trying to build up the positive, yeah. At the high school, ELA participation hit 95.8, but math and science were down under 95, 92.7 and 85%.
How are we looking at those?
Well, I can't say because we start testing next week, so as soon as this testing starts, sometimes we get more phone calls. Middle school still has a very large number of opt-outs. 4-5 has a much lower number than years past. Right now, Hereford hasn't had none, and Marlboro has had 3. And we didn't start Keystones yet. I have maybe 7 on my calendar for that.
It's interesting they don't pull opt-outs off the board,
They can.
right?
Well,
But you would think
That's
that like,
PA, right?
If-
I don't know why it's a
I don't know.
factor.
So
That, I
we
mean, I
went
think,
through ours.
if I don't want to be
I
tested,
don't know.
why should we be punished for that? You know?
Right.
Or with
well,
things
that
like
was the nature of our response. You know,
Yeah.
Kim massaged it when I wrote it. I was like,
I'm sure
"Make it
yours was
important."
fun to do.
Yeah, it was. We were like, well, maybe we say it nicer. But really that, you know, our question is, you know, what, you
I
know,
mean, if people
make
want
it
to opt out, that's
valuable.
fine, but we shouldn't get
Right.
penalized for that.
Right. And that was our suggestion. You know,
I'm sure Kim said it very nice.
it was very diplomatic. So, you know, we've got sort of 3 things swirling around as it relates to participation and what test you're participating in. So, you know, we have to work through some of those, and I think it is a systems issue and
Yeah,
raising
definitely.
awareness in our community of the value of it. I don't know how much impact that'll have because it is their right to opt out. And so, you know, I don't know if our plea will make any difference.
Probably not.
I do a training every year mandated by the state. I'm our district assessment coordinator, so I train all our school assessment coordinators, which is generally our principals, counselors, and all my friends sit in. It's 2 hours
We
of
love it.
torture. But one of the things that I say, because I believe it to be true, this is not a high stakes kids should cry and get totally stressed out about. This is an opportunity to show what you know. Our teachers have worked hard all year. Our students have worked hard all year. Let's see what you have learned in this particular school year. So
They don't
it's-
sell it well.
well, and I think it's important for us to say it's not high stakes. Like when people cry, we should never be crying about testing. We should just not be crying about testing. It's just an opportunity.
It's easier said than done.
No,
absolutely.
but I think sometimes
think you're
teachers
coy.
lay added
Yeah.
added pressure because they're nervous and they really want
Yeah.
kids to take it seriously, and that's subliminal. That's not on purpose. I think sometimes we are like, oh, state testing, and sometimes parents have that idea. So the more we can talk about how it really is just a measure of what you know according to your grade level, we have to start changing our language as educators and keeping that less.
Stressful.
Yeah, it's real. The kids have enough stress in their lives right now. This does not need to be one more thing.
I mean, it's just a really complex issue because it's threaded with teacher evaluation and administrator evaluation. So it has value to the adults in doing this work. And so, you know, when they changed the entire teacher evaluation system, they ratcheted up for teachers in a very undue manner. And so, you know, I think that's why it gets like, I mean, and it does feel a lot like prison when PSSAs and Keystones are going on. Like, you can't even go to the bathroom. without an escort, and you gotta be documented.
You
I
gotta
mean,
cover everything
it
up on the wall.
feels, right, it feels like you're going through some TSA kind
It's
of.
not natural.
It is
It's
not
not
natural.
natural learning.
So,
And you saw in the Future Ready in the 3 areas, still the crux of that score, the largest percentage is the column on the left, which is achievement and growth based upon what? The Keystone exams.
so we're trying to, bring up just sort of take down the pressure, but still, the form with which that data is used is high stakes for the adults in the business, and that's a reality.
Do we even need like statewide data to see, we're trending like the rest of the state is as far as
Yep.
participation rates go?
Yep.
So are we in line with everybody else?
There were
or-
a number of LEAs, I forget the exact number, that were, that fell below 95%. So we were of a majority.
I'm not saying it's a good thing.
No, I
I'm just
know,
saying
but at
we're not
least
the
people
outlier.
do a reality
We're
check.
everybody else is-
100%.
And I think it's a sign of,
Statewide average.
Yeah.
So you can see the statewide average
Yeah.
is trending the same way that all our groups
I
have
will,
trended.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I will tell you too, this is the first time that as a state, Pennsylvania fell under 95%, so the federal government is now auditing Pennsylvania. So that may be the singular factor that may have students not count against us if they're medical or something. The federal government is now breathing down the necks of PA, which is why we had to submit a plan. So that may make a difference.
so are there any questions about that?
There's a slight trend down.
I feel like,
I think
yeah.
we need to do that.
Yeah, God bless.
Because now we're going to turn, do you want
This
to?
is really fun stuff.
May I ask a question? Karen?
Sure.
This is probably, I probably already know the answer to this, but, so the state comes in and has identified our areas of need, and do we get any funding for extra support?
Yeah, right. I think we all knew that answer.
But it's a great question to ask.
It definitely is.
We're just going to tell you.
That's logical.
Another unfunded
Yeah,
mandate.
right,
Love
so
it.
that's why it doesn't happen.
Right.
So as we have, every time we get together, I give you some curriculum updates. Our writers are doing a great job. They're feeling the pinch here at the end of the year to get their curriculum rating done, their assessments written and approved by me, which is not easy, and then get them into Linkit and the other systems that they need to get into. And so we're wrapping up those things. It's been a learning experience this year with our next generation science standards. I keep telling you what a great job our teachers are doing. They really are. And they're worried about test scores, I won't lie to you. Our biology teachers are really excited about jumping in with NGSS because it will be so student-driven. And they're very concerned about what that means for test scores. And we said, well, could get worse than 26. No, I'm just kidding. But we have had a tradition of very strong scores. We now have students who have come through the middle school, again, with that life science program leading right into biology. And I do believe that hands-on science and the way that students are asked to be creative and problem solve under Next Gen will help them on the state assessments. The reason I think the teachers are very concerned is we've had no information from PD about what the new assessments will look like. They won't even field test them until, I think, 24, 25. And so we're setting all this curriculum up, and I'm thrilled with the work that they're doing. It's going to be fantastic.
But
But we don't know what that's going to look like on a test.
Well, how do you know what the
I said to
target
them-
is?
Right.
Well, I said to them, I don't see how it could be any different. The
Should be the
test will
standards,
look
right?
I
like,
mean, you would think.
it will look like them
But-
having to look at a problem and discern information. And that's what we're having kids do. So I don't, it can't be hands-on.
But that's also one of the areas that in your presentations of several months back, being able to do that was a real challenge, especially from the last year to this year and prior, right? It was the multi-step problem that everybody was having issues with.
And I think part of the answer to that is the scaffolding of instruction, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a video on an upcoming slide, and really trying to make sure we're supporting the students and then letting them just try and letting them figure it out. I don't think we ask enough of them. I think we're too concerned that they need help. So I think if we put them out to sink or swim, they're probably going to swim pretty well with some of the ways we've been supporting our teachers. So I do have a list of teachers who will be writing next year. If you remember correctly, We talked about doing 6 to 12 NGSS this year, and then next year you can see that we have science in K to 5. I have some volunteers there. You see a couple of blanks because I'm hoping for some of my friends to step up and, jump in. And listen, I will tell you, participation in terms of curriculum writing has gone down. Teachers are burnt out. It's not a joke, and I don't hold that against them. But I am so appreciative when people do step up. And Sarah and I give them lots of support. We're kind of geeks in this area. But it's one of the things that I love to do most. So every opportunity I have, and some of these folks have written curriculum with me before, so I anticipate a really good time. I do. So how do you even laugh at that? The other thing I should mention is that we, as you know, we have retirements in the middle school library and in the high school library, and we have some innovative thinkers who are saying, let's kind of make this broader than a librarian job. And of course it is. There's lots of things that they do that are past that, but trying to integrate more of multimedia. And so we have kind of a new job description that we're looking at, and we'll be looking at some teachers. In order to make sure we don't step on anybody's toes, we have to make sure that whatever we have these new positions doing, and really only middle school has written curriculum, we want to make sure it doesn't step on the toes of our technology classes or our computer classes or our flight classes K to 5. So I've had 3 folks step up, both flight teachers, and one of our librarians so far has said, yes, we want to look at our curriculum again. We want to make sure it's aligned well, that we're not overlapping. We talk a lot about cybersecurity with students, and sometimes that happens in computer and sometimes it happens in libraries. So we want to make sure they've got 2 very separate but complementary curriculum, and so that we can fit as much in as kids need to do as we roll forward there. So you'll see that I have to be determined for that middle school person, and then we're going to work in conjunction with those folks. We do need some work done to our TV studio courses. Emily Barker's been an amazing addition to our staff. She's outstanding, and she has lots of great ideas. So first we have to get that curriculum in place.
She's the one that came for extracurricular, right?
Oh, yeah. She's great. We had her before and got her back, so I'm very glad. And then in the area of social studies, we have to have we have to have a new government course. We don't necessarily have to, but it's one of the things that we're doing as a part of our graduation requirement shift. For years, Pennsylvania had a requirement for a half credit of government before you graduate. We just think it's a super idea, and so we're going to take our existing Intro to Political Science course and turn it into that new government course. And then we also have a couple of courses that just haven't been rewritten through the cycle, sociology and biology. Both of those are previous writers for me, so that should be fun. And then we're still talking about an exploratory world language course, if that were to come to pass, and there's lots more we would share about that, just not yet. That would be on there as well. So the maximum amount, this is lower than normal, and I'll tell you that it's because taking on too many writers in one year proves counterproductive to getting the work done well. And so those are the courses that are up for writing this upcoming school year. I don't know why I said down. And then if you go back through some of these other lists, you would see that we've had more, but it's really difficult. If we want to make traction in curriculum, instruction, and assessment, we have to make sure every piece of that is done correctly. And I do read all of their work and critique it and sit with them, and that's the part that's not fun for them. It's super fun for me.
So
Kim,
when you say more, do you mean more courses were updated?
I do mean more
or
courses.
More people were involved?
More courses.
Right, okay.
And sometimes more people, JP, because a lot of times I'll get like 2 writers to do a
Right.
particular course, and in this instance I have a bunch of just 1 writing a course. That's hard for the teacher too. Like they really want somebody to bounce ideas off of. So speaking of curriculum review cycle, this is something I just want to share with you very quickly. I had shared with Andrea and Alan, and Sarah and I worked on this together because it does become daunting to try to get all of the curriculum review work done in a particular given year. And so the stages, as they're described, this is our old curriculum cycle at the top, and then one that I have kind of drafted to share with you today in the hopes that it would make sense to you. The stages are the same. They're the same word. I just use the words underneath. So it's the same thing. I just kind of use the number and what we do in that stage. And of course, as I do everything, it's color-coded. It just makes my brain happy, and I can follow things along.
What we've discovered is that it's really unrealistic and not accurate that we're going through all of ELA K-12 in a given school year. That's just not happening. You can see that social studies should have happened all together in 2018, 2019. I'm bringing you 2 courses right now that hadn't been written because we didn't have volunteers and/or time to do that. So when we look at the updated draft, page down.
COVID didn't help either.
Not helping if I page down? Yeah. So you can see that we broke it down into ELA K to 5 and then 6 to 12. And then we broke it down into, I just want it to be more accurate. I don't want you to look at that curriculum review cycle and be like, oh good, all of science got done last year. That would be an impossibility, even if you cloned me and Sarah, it just would not work. And so we broke it down a little bit just to make sure we have the time to do the work that we need to do. We're also going to spend a little bit more time in stage 1. Sarah's going to lead that work kind of the year before, getting ready for writing, doing that research, and being able to be ready to just know what we need to do in that upcoming school year, write and review. That third piece is implementation, and that's a tough year. I don't spend a lot of time with people because I don't have the time to do it. I want to write that into my schedule. I want to make sure that's a part of what we're doing. And then we audit what's happening. We constantly do. We're constantly improving. And I appreciate so many of our teacher leaders who have taken that role and just run with it. They know that's what they do every year. They also make sure they make the changes in BYOC, which is now called Embark, which is our curriculum platform. And so I wanted to share this with you just to say we're really looking at breaking that apart to make it a little bit more manageable. And I also think it serves us well to build sometimes K to 5 and then 6 to 12, and sometimes 12 to 6 and then 5 to K. So the way that we have that set up is very purposeful. We also attended to the budget restraints that we would have based on this. So we don't want to do ELA and math in a given year, A, because the K to 5 teachers would die probably, but B, because that's a huge commitment financially. And so we've tried to space that out too, so we have very similar budget numbers rolling through each year. So I wanted to share that with you just in the effort to be transparent and say, I want to get it right. I want to do it right, and this seems much more feasible than what we were trying to do, and I wasn't even trying. There was no way I could do K to 12 science in a given year. So I just wanted it to be a little bit more accurate than it was. All these documents are linked in the slide deck, which you have access to as well if you want to look a little bit more. And down below, I kind of defined them. Again, this curriculum handbook was put together before I got here, refined a couple of words, really, it looks the way that it always does. I just tried to, and then also on there you can see where the split is between Sarah and I, if you're at all interested. Does that make sense? Do you have questions before I go off of it?
That's great. Thank you.
I did feel as though Andrea and Alan supported that, and I was very grateful for it.
Well, because I wrote the original one. But so for context sake, we did not attempt to do K to 12. I think that's a little bit of misrepresentation. That first audit stage, they looked at the K to 12, they prioritized the work, and then we only worked on what came out of the department's recommendations. So in science, the department was just getting their hands wet with everyday math, and they were like, no way, please do not even start looking at science. So we didn't. But this is much more clear on how that work will get done. So it does give you the impression, but no, we never did every course in that content.
Okay, that's
yeah, we were, Kim, what's your problem?
I know, I was like,
Allie and I did it. That's what I should have said.
Which is, because I knew when we talked about it anyway. One of the things that comes out of curriculum review every year is a request for materials. Now, I was famous at my other schools for a non-monetary curriculum review. Like, we would just review the documents, update them, and no one got to buy anything. And that's actually been the case with all the work that we've done here too, because sometimes they don't need anything new. They needed a refresh. They needed a, why am I doing this? They needed to just look at, what should I take out? What should I add? In the instance of the courses that you see listed here, these are necessary materials for the new updated curriculum. So German 1 and 2 uses the same book, pretty low number, I'm not too disappointed with that. They use the same textbook for both of them, so that is what Petra indicated that they needed. French 3 and French 4 has finally been completed. It's only about $3,500 for those texts. Again, classes are really small. I added a little bit in there for shipping. AP Spanish has an online resource, that Talk Abroad. It's really interesting. It's like literally you're having a conversation with someone. It's pretty cheap and they're really interested in trying it. So we thought we'd give that a try. And they also have a textbook that's $47.48 per, I think she asked for 15, yeah, 15. Now, I don't yet have the choice from my science teachers. Ironically, or maybe not, there's so much open resource curriculum and platforms that are totally free that the science teachers are totally using and digging, and they're downloading what they need to in case, you know, the website ever goes away. But they said, Kim, there's no good textbook. And I would agree with this. When we looked at What Works Clearinghouse and we looked at a lot of the sites that help us figure out what would be a good book for different courses, right now there are none that are high quality aligned to NGSS. Some of them are like okay, like that's the best rating we've seen is okay. Now in the case of our academic chemistry and in the case of environmental science, those teachers say, I need something. For the students that I have, I need some type of textbook to work from. And so they'll be requesting, and middle school is saying, we want all open resource, we don't need anything except we might need some supplies to pull that off. Thermometers, you know, the types of things that they would need to do some of those labs. Those are not to me yet. And again, it's been a strenuous year for them to write. So I'm okay with that if you are. We certainly can get it in and ordered before this fiscal year is over. So we can still expend this year's funds to do that. We just don't have them yet. I put middle school math on here because it's a pretty big chunk. Generally, when we purchase curricular materials, we get a 6 or a 7-year contract. We've not been able to review again for CPM. It is upcoming, or for middle school math. So there is a bigger renewal right now because we have to re-up that whole contract a year at a time for all the materials. So that's the cost for that, for 6, 7, and 8. Again, that's new, that's not a result of curriculum review. I just wanted to let you know that because we've extinguished our old contract, it costs a little more to re-up them, so I wanted to put that on there for you. I also showed you what we budgeted last year for elementary and secondary. Pretty large amount because I wasn't sure what science was going to need. If you take a look at all of those courses, the fact that they don't need much is really encouraging to me. Don't worry, I'll spend it elsewhere. But I did want to show you that. And to date, we've already spent around $12,000. That's for just different things that have come up from a previous year's ELA or something like that. They needed a few extra copies of a new book. Eventually, the building pays for that, but as part of a new adoption, I still pick up a lot of those things. And the above amount, I don't know if I recalculated, that might not be right. That's close. It's close. But so what I wanted to show you was that there's still money in there. There's still money. We're not going over our budget in any way, shape, or form. But those are, if with your permission, I'd like to move that forward onto the board agenda for approval in May for these resources. Unless you want me to hold them all until I have the other three. Yes.
Hey, Dan? Okay, yeah.
All right, then I can order and
Just
charge.
doesn't need an official.
And then, as I did last year, I came forward to ask for some money for summer training. And we have a huge undertaking happening right now with standards-based reporting. The kindergarten card is done. It's in that continual improvement cycle. And right now we're working very diligently on first grade. We have 2 first grade teachers and our 2 instructional coaches who are knocking it out of the park. They're making sure they're going back and talking to first grade teachers, but there's still some more work that needs to be done on that. So that is one of the summer projects that I'm hoping we can schedule for this summer. So you can see that's the first one on there, standards-based reporting. They said they need about 20 more hours over the summer. I've run the totals there for you. The last column is notes of who might do that. K-5 math, I can't even tell you how good the conversations have been, and we even had the 6th grade coach involved in them. They're sitting and they're looking at every unit starting in kindergarten, and they're talking about common language, and they're talking about what's happening when we're teaching addition and when we're teaching subtraction, and something's amiss because when they get to 4 or 5, they're subtracting wrong. They don't understand how to line their numbers up and subtract. So we sat and puzzled over this for a couple hours one day, and we came out of it. What's that?
So do it. I don't understand it. When I was doing that homework, just line it up. It's simple.
They subtract backwards. They subtract from the bottom up. And I'm like, what? So we discovered it's a place value issue. So starting in kindergarten and first grade, and even as we move place value all the way up and through, we're trying to reinforce for them how important that is to keep track of. We're also showing them the standard algorithm a little bit earlier. So the idea with both of our math programs is kids should have really flexible thinking about math and numbers and how to do math. What we're finding is kids who struggle, you're giving them too much flexibility before they have a firm foundation in it. And so we're really implementing some things next year instructionally, and we're lining up the curriculum accordingly to make sure the fundamental skills that kids need, they're secure in. So we can still spiral the way the program has us do, but we're not introducing every single strategy so they can get every single feel for the numbers. Our advanced learners will still get that. We want them to have that flexible thinking. Our other kids will get that as well when they're ready for it. We have so many kids coming into fourth and fifth grade who are not subtracting correctly. The other thing we did is we started giving them graph papers. You can use graph paper on the PSSAs, why wouldn't we? Everybody should be having a graph paper. You line your numbers right up and it solves a lot of problems. So those are some of the things, but we really want to get finished with that audit. We want to look at the assessment portfolio, get our handbook in line so everybody's clear on that. So we're looking about at some time for that. You can see the cost there. Same thing with literacy. We've been working on this forever. We want to get our literacy handbook rolled up and together. We've made such great strides. I'm really proud of all our literacy leaders in the buildings, working with the principals. It's just been really amazing to watch. So we want to get those projects kind of dialed in. And then there is a need to meet with our coaches, our reading specialists, our math specialists over the summertime so we can prepare for August in-service, so we can wrap up some of these other things and make sure they get their eyes on it before it goes out. So that's just 6 hours we're asking for there. And you can see also that we have library media specialist curriculum work. I don't know why that's on there, because I have it on my curriculum writer. So I don't know if I wanted to get that done. I don't know. We can give or take that one. It's only $1,000. So when you look at middle school math, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. We've had an interesting transition post-COVID at the middle school. The product that's used for all of our math programs at the middle school for every course is called CPM. It's College Preparatory Math. And it has a particular design, and its design has instruction included. So they work on collaboration, they work on problem solving, and they work on what's called mixed space practice. So the research shows if you continue to revisit concepts over and over again, you'll remember them longer than if you just do an addition test and move on, and then a subtraction test and move on. So this mixed space practice. Because it's so collaborative in nature, it doesn't lend itself well to virtual learning. So while we were on at-home learning during COVID, teachers abandoned CPM. They really couldn't do it, and I get that 100%. They did a whole lot of work on a lot of things to have the students participate and learn well, learning math, but not necessarily with that product. So the beginning of this year, I learned that they had never gone back to CPM, that they were still using the types of things that they had done during at-home learning. So as soon as I learned that, we embarked on some conversations. And many of the teachers said, well, I was never trained, and so what we need to do is a reset. Because we're, for the short term at least, keeping CPM, and my thought is even for the long term, those teachers who have not been trained, and the year I started was 2019. We hired 3 new middle school math teachers, and then the end of that year, COVID hit. So they truly never were CPM trained, and we've picked up at least 1 more since then. So we have the opportunity to take our teachers to Upper Moreland, because that's where the training's being offered. And it is a 3-day training. It's June 12, 13, 14, so we're out of school. I'll be going with them, and it would get them reset and trained. Of the 13 teachers we need to train, 7 are able to go then. So what we'd like to do is pay them curriculum rate to go and their mileage, because it's a pretty far hike from here to there. Get them trained. For the 6 who are not trained, we're still working on a plan as to how to get them trained, because we need to have that level set for them. Chris and I have a pretty good idea of how we're going to do it, but I don't want to say anything yet because I'm not 100% sure. But this ask is for up to 10 teachers. Now I know the actual number is 7 to send them. So that's the first number, 6840, is the cost to pay them for their hours. 265 is to pay them for their mileage. Andrea and I but we still have some ESSER 3 money that we were going to use for this particular training. We can't put all of these under there, although, you know, depending on how things shake out, maybe more rather than less could be paid with ESSER funds. But I know for our business office to pay teachers, I have to have some type of motion on the board that approves this funding for them to do summer projects. So that's my ask today, if we would be able to put that forward for approval on the agenda. I do have a lot, Sarah and I have been working to get some folks on board, so we do have some willing folks, and that would be super.
What do you guys think?
I have a question first.
Yes.
For the 6 teachers that won't be trained in CPM, I know you said you have a plan that you're working on. Can you follow up and let us know?
Yes,
when
I
you have
promise,
that
I
plan?
promise I will, yep.
We don't want to have the inconsistency of.
Yep, and we
a
can't,
bunch
and
of
that's what
training,
Chris
a
and
bunch
I
of
are.
go- Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I can tell you that it will happen, we're just ironing out details.
Sure, understood.
Thank you.
Is it,
Absolutely. Follow up.
with the fact that we're noticing it now, is it just because getting back into the buildings and like, how come we didn't, no offense, but how come we didn't like pick up on it sooner? Is it-
That's a great question. I'm not in the classrooms every day, and I'm
Not
not even
that-
sure, Mike, if I went in, I would have known.
Well,
Because
yeah.
sometimes they're not doing, the actual CPM thing. I mean, it came out because there was this discontent, some were going back, some were not going back, and so that was a fun meeting. And truthfully, our teachers do so much work when they need to help the students, and they had done so much work, there was a reluctance to go back. They really felt as though it was making a difference with students. And the data doesn't show that. And so that's kind of where we have to look and see and moving them forward. And, we all talk about what we want out of our graduates. It's creative thinkers, it's problem solvers, and that's what CPM is built on. It's real life scenarios. I mean, they ask big problems and kids have to struggle with them. Similar to your shout out, JP, with the math thing. I had that in my folder. So that's what we want kids to be wrestling with, those big problems. And so that creates in them a curiosity and an engagement because they too want to find the answer.
And it's a real life thing.
It's a real life
It's totally real life
thing. We
thing.
know motivation internally for kids is really 2 things. 1, they find success in what they're doing, and 2, they find meaning in what they're doing. And so that is the foundation for a lot of our programs, CPM being one of them. So after a lot of conversation this year, we came to the realization that we want to stay with that for a number of reasons, but we need to get teachers trained.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. I'm almost done, I promise.
Yes.
Okay. I feel like I'm just asking for money, so I just
We'll
want to put a
take
big,
everything
like,
you said.
It's funny,
yeah.
so that was a good time.
We'll make it official.
Oh, I'm changing my slide, I'm here like, can you see that? Thanks, Amy.
Yeah,
Amy.
All right.
All right, so lastly, I want to first show you a video. So we've been talking about TLS for about 3 years now. We brought them in and they've been doing some great work at 4 or 5 middle school and high school. The whole point of their training is that students, that teachers would become effective instructors. But more than that, that they would become differentiated instructors. When we know what kids need, we can structure a classroom so that different people are doing different things based on their specific need. And that's really what TLS is all about. They show them strategies, they come into the classroom, they coach with them. It's really been a great experience. You heard that when Chris's teachers were here talking about the work they've been doing with TLS. Rob, I think you would echo that your teachers are doing really well with it. And so
They like the reps.
I'm going to ask for more money for them, but I want you to see a little bit about what they're doing. This was a video made by a couple of the guys there who worked at the middle school. No idea if the volume works here, so.
Well, Jim's here.
Yeah, Jim's here.
Did you hear
There,
it?
dang.
There it is.
First of all, thank you for sharing your practice with your colleagues. What do you find to be most powerful about that opportunity in professional learning?
So this was a day, I'm just gonna keep interrupting. This was a day where everybody got together to share what they'd been doing. So it was like a best practices fair. It was in the cafeteria. Teachers who were in the program got to walk around and talk to other teachers who were in the program. They all learned what they'd been doing in their classrooms that was successful. I should have started there. So anyway.
I feel as though learning from colleagues is extremely beneficial in, educational careers, simply because we're the ones that do it every single day. So, you can learn from a textbook, you can talk to a presenter for hours and hours, but until you're learning with someone who actually is doing it in the classroom with live individuals, it doesn't really mean anything, and it doesn't really shine through. So actually talking to someone and being able to kind of listen to them, what they did exactly, how they did their assignments, how the students reacted, it's extremely beneficial. And it allows you to kind of take what they said, reflect upon your own teaching, and think about how you can implement it into your own classroom.
So you shared Jigsaw strategy and how you used it. What are some of your takeaways from Jigsaw? How have you found it to be successful with your kids?
I enjoyed Jigsaw in the fact that I think it was very student-centered. The students were able to work within a partnership, within a group setting. They were allowed to kind of use each other in order to kind of get through difficult and challenging tasks in order to get to one ultimate end goal. And yes, I was there for guidance, but like I said, the students were really focused in doing what they needed to do with the layout that I gave them. So I think just the partnerships, working into groups and kind of going toward that ultimate goal is what really works with the Jigsaw. And I think that, you know, heterogeneous and homogeneous grouping is miracle workers in the classroom. You know, having them kind of working with, you know, their own levels, but then having that kind of crutch of a higher level beside them really lets them work to their fullest potential.
You mentioned how you tiered and scaffolded the work, and one of the takeaways in terms of students not feeling like they're being, you know, put on the spot or isolated out. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Right. When I tiered my assignments, I made them physically look in the paper very similar. I did want the different groups to think that they were, you know, I'm in this group because, you know, I don't have that skill, or I'm in that group because I have that skill. I wanted them to feel that they were working on a common goal. So I tiered them as per their level, but they physically looked the same. They had no idea that they were doing different activities because they were reading the same material as well. So I think that was beneficial because they all knew that they had to work together to get to the end goal. So they had no idea that they were tiered.
So sometimes you don't know what's happening with the groups that are coming in. And one of the things about TLS is they really do celebrate teachers who try, teachers who take risks, and they really want to showcase the things that they're doing well. I loved the pictures in that video as much as the audio that she was sharing. I mean, you just saw the teachers were really listening to one another, and there was a sheet where they were actually taking notes if they wanted to go back and try it in their own classroom. So that's a little bit about what TLS does. That was their best practices fair. That's generally at the end of the year when they celebrate their year of learning. And Rob, you had a similar experience at the high school, and I remember.
You didn't come to the video us?
It wasn't me. But I remember Jen Cenovitis saying, because she didn't know much about the program at all, that she learned more about TLS through that rotation than she probably would have been a year of sitting in the classes, and how engaged the teachers were. So I will be putting forward 3 different proposals for professional development in the hopes I could put them on the board agenda for approval. TLS would be one of them. This year, their work will continue at 6 through 8 and 9 through 12 with the next cohort. They work in small groups, 14 teachers in a cohort, so they have that individualized attention. They're also working in some capacity with the teachers they've already trained to keep that going. And we have a group of teachers, special area teachers mainly, art, music, PE, library, flight, not flight because that's not 6 through 12, that have video trainings just on the concept so they can speak the same language, but their work looks a little bit different. So the total, including an induction program that Sarah will be working on with them, we have a new stipulation from the state that we need a 2-year induction program, which is a really good thing. And so we don't want to have a whole bunch of new teachers come into Upper Perk and not do TLS, because then we'll need them forever. So we're going to build TLS into our induction program so that as they come in, they get trained. Sarah will become, our guru in that. Our coaches will have or will be trained so that they can continue that legacy. So we'll be having Sarah do a little bit of work with TLS to learn that, and then to be able to turn that around. So all of that together, plus the online platform that we use as administrators, comes to just under $140,000. We've used Title II monies in the past, although Title II last year was only about $88,000. I did not see this year's allocation, so I don't know how much it is. So the rest would roll into our general budget. We've actually used ESSER funds the past 2 years to pay for it, because it is that once and done training, because once you're trained, you're done. And actually this year at 4-5, because everybody was trained and they had 1 year of follow-up, Their time this year will just be coaching. There won't be any new learning, they'll just be coaching on the learning that they've had. MCIU, we have contracted with them over the past 2 years for just about $10,000 worth of professional development services. Generally, that's K through 5. We have a strong need to bring some of that literacy learning to the high school, 6 through 12. So we'd like to engage in that contract again, but shift the audience to 6 through 12. And then CPM, because of the training this summer, we're going to need some maintenance training throughout the school year, plus a plan for those 6 other teachers to get trained. So we're looking at about $15,000. So 140, 10, and 15. As much as we can, we'll get into our title funds and any leftover ESSER money, which is pretty minimal. But most of that would be coming from our general budget, which we haven't had approved yet, which is what makes this so difficult. But if I want to get TLS on my calendar, that's at least one that I should put forward so that they set aside my trainers for that. So those are all my asks. That's it. That's the last slide.
So I have a finance committee question. So where are these funds already in your
They're in my budget, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what
they're in my
wanted to-
budget. I don't know if anybody took scissors to my budget or not.
No.
But they're in there.
Try not to do that too.
So we'll make it official. Kim has proposed 3 asks tonight. Are we okay with moving that forward to the full board for a vote? Do we have a motion for that?
Motion.
Do we have a second for that?
Second.
All right. Any questions about any of that? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. There you go. Cool.
Great. I will stop talking. Thank you. Your support means a ton, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Does anybody, any other board members have any questions about any of the stuff that we talked about tonight?
No.
Melanie, you got anything?
Nope, I've been listening.
Audience?
I have one for Andrea. You mentioned that you're going to have teachers share their perception about the MTSS process. Is that-
Well, it's conditions for learning, so it goes to the high school.
So it's
It's building specific. So it's,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's just at the high school.
Although we have done,
And we likely will in this
Correct.
upcoming school year, at least K through 5. There is a survey, it's more like an assessment tool.
Yep.
And we've had the 3 elementary principals, 4, 5, K3, K3, work with their leadership team to give us some feedback as to where they feel they are. So that is a perception survey. We don't know yet when that'll be rolled out to all staff because we're using it to help us set goals.
and we administered one at the beginning of the 1920 school year, and then something happened. And now, honestly, where K-5 is compared to where 6 through 12 is, there are 2 different stratospheres as it relates to MTSS and its implementation. So it wasn't wise to repeat that one because it went to everyone. So now we're trying to be much more specific in the audience, but we will repeat those.
Okay. So eventually it will be repeated for K-5 or no?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that'll be very soon, actually.
Correct. 6 through 12, maybe a little bit.
Probably the end of this school year, not this school year, but the end of next school year, I think once we've had a chance to kind of see where the group thinks they are, work to improve those areas, we'll do the perception in the spring. There are much more teachers I have seen really asking for and digging into the data and wanting to know more. It's been a really nice movement, an area of growth for at least our K-5 teachers. And that's not a knock on 6 to 12. It really is just
It's a different animal.
the data sources are totally different.
Thank you.
I would just ask, I'm sure that you will, but, share with the committee at that time, whoever's on here. So, okay. All right, cool. All right, anybody else? Final thoughts? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion? Here is none. All those in favor say aye. Opposed?
They can't get to it.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.
They're hers.
Thanks,
Can you check
everyone.
out this candy?
Oh my God, somebody was serious.
Look, it's a plastic bag.
Dude, Rob's been killing it.
Sandwich bag. Isn't that cute?